This is Lecture 1 in Anatomy and Physiology, and the material we're going to be covering here is just kind of an introduction to the terms of anatomy and physiology and the basic characteristics of life as covered by Chapter 1 in our text. So here we go. Anatomy is basically just the study of the structure of body parts. A lot of times you'll also hear the word morphology. Morph just means form or shape, basically, and ology is always the study of. So anatomy is really heavily dependent upon physiology, which means the shape or the anatomy of a body part has a lot to do with its function or how it does its job. So anatomy and physiology are tied really closely together, and for the entire year we will be talking about how body parts are shaped and how they do their job based on that shape. As much as possible, I'll be giving you information about the Greek and Latin roots that form most of the names and structures we'll be discussing. I think it makes it easier if you have some idea what those terms mean. Then you're not just memorizing terms, but really recognizing them as they come up. In any living organism, we're going to focus pretty much on humans, but in any living organism, we start with the teeny tiniest structures you can imagine, which are atoms. Oh, that is definitely not what I was intending to do there. Don't mind me. We start with atoms, and as we move down this level, step by step by step, each of the details and the complexity of each level increases. So atoms are the simplest subunit of all living things, actually of all anything, all matter in general. And we use atoms to form molecules. Molecules form large structures called macromolecules. Macromolecules, things like fats, proteins, carbohydrates, are put together in a variety of ways to make little tiny structures in every single cell called organelles. I'm hoping this term sounds familiar from biology sophomore year. Organelles are found within cells, and this is really where we're going to spend the majority of our year. We're looking at how cells make up tissues, like muscle and nerves, how tissue makes up organs, like hearts and lungs, and how organs are involved in organ systems that have a large job in each body. It's important to remember what makes something living versus non-living. Dead is a characteristic of having been alive, so living and dead are not opposites of one another in biology. Living and non-living are the opposites. So there are a few things that make something alive. It has to have cells, it has to grow over time, it has to be able to reproduce. That means it can make new versions of itself. It has to be able to use food and energy. And this is the big kind of new idea that we're going to talk a lot about today, which is maintenance of homeostasis, or the ability to keep one's internal environment steady. A lot of times you'll hear that as metabolism. So that's what we're going to talk about now. In order to maintain a stable internal environment, there are really 5 basic characteristics or requirements that all living things need. Water is the first one. Water, as you know, makes up about 3/4 of our planet, and it also makes up about 70% of the human body. Nearly every chemical reaction that happens in your body happens in water. So it's incredibly important for chemical reactions, for moving materials from place to place, and for helping to keep your body temperature stable. You may or may not know that water holds heat at a much more steady pace than anything else. I know it will come as no surprise to you when I say that food is another requirement for you to stay alive. If anybody understands the needs of food often and in great quantities, it's people in high school. So I'm sure that one's not a big surprise. The other one for humans is oxygen. All living things have to have some kind of gas, some kind of breathing taking place, and in us, that's oxygen. So oxygen helps to break down the food, and the food helps to keep everything in the body functioning and working with energy. Whenever we eat and we burn oxygen, we produce heat. So it's really important that our bodies have an outlet for getting rid of that heat, as well as an ability to hold the heat that we need in order to keep the reactions happening at an appropriate rate and speed. And the last one, probably not something you would think of right off the bat, is pressure. Our bodies are very dependent upon the pressure both inside and outside, right? If there's too much pressure outside, the soft parts of our body will get smashed. And if there's too much pressure inside, the soft parts will leave our skin, which would be undesirable in most cases. So in order to maintain these levels of homeostasis, we have a really interesting system that has kind of three basic parts. We have receptors, which basically act as monitors. We have monitors all throughout the body that say, here's how much water we have, here's what temperature we have, here's the amount of sugar in our blood, and on and on and on. So the receptors are just in charge of monitoring situations and conditions. So we're just going to write monitor here. Chubby, but that'll work. So monitoring is another word for receptors. Set point means at what level should everything be at. So the set point is just a comparison of what we want to have. So this is the ideal. Right? Your body temperature should be about 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the set point for temperature in the body. And then the effectors basically respond to any issues, problems, anything outside the normal range. So we have monitors or receptors, we have an ideal set point, and we have effectors that respond when necessary. There are two basic ways that the body can respond. The first one is called negative feedback, and this is by far the most common response system in the body. So here's an example of a specific situation. We were just talking about body temperature. So let's say the body receptors detect a temperature of 101 degrees Fahrenheit, which is too hot for the body. And so they cause a response to occur within the body called an effect, right? There's a cause, high temperature, there's an effect, which in this case, we're going to say is sweating. There are lots of other ways that the body can respond to heat, but sweating is kind of the first one. So then what happens as your body sweats, right? Water and heat are being released through the skin. And as water or sweat is being released through your skin, it evaporates, which causes the skin to cool. As the skin cools, the tissue underneath it cools, and the body overall cools down. When your body detects that it is back to the set point, right? We get back to, say, 99 degrees, right? We're dropping closer to where we want to be. Then the sweating stops. That's why it's called negative feedback. As we get a particular response, in this case, lower temperatures, that tells the body to stop the response or to dial it down or to reduce it, which is sort of the same as being negative, right? As you reduce something, it becomes more negative. So if we're reducing the effect, then it's a negative feedback system. There are a lot of other examples of negative feedback systems in your book with some very nice diagrams. So I would really encourage you to check out figure 1.5 and 1.6. Who knows, you may even see it on a test sometime. There is one other mechanism for change in the body, which is called positive feedback. And as you might expect, it is basically the opposite of negative feedback. And it's an entirely different system that is much, much, much less common. So you can kind of think about positive feedback. I sort of think about it, I'm going to come back down to the screen in a second, but you can think about it sort of like a snowball, right? When you have a snowball at the top of the hill and it starts to roll, it's not going very quickly. It's pretty tiny and it's slowed down by all this snow on the hill. but as it rolls, it picks up more snow. And as it picks up more snow, it gets bigger. As it gets bigger, it rolls faster. As it rolls faster, it picks up more snow. As it picks up more snow, it gets bigger, it rolls faster. And so on and on and on and on. You get this effect where it starts out with just one tiny change, or in this case, one tiny snowball. And as that change happens, it increases and increases and increases over time and causes a bigger change. That's what a positive feedback loop is. Oh, that's not going to work very well. Let's see how we can do this. Let's move that out of the way. There we go. So the positive feedback loop, an example in your body, would be when you get an injury. So we'll check out this dude's leg right here, right? He's cut his knee, as has the little girl on the left. And inside of every blood vessel, we have these special cells, which is what this picture is, called platelets and clotting factors and some things we'll talk about later in the year. But as the skin damage is detected by the body, these cells start rushing over here to clot up the hole and to stop the injury. And as the clot forms, it causes more cells to come, and more cells and more cells and more cells. So the one little clotting factor kicks off this chain reaction of more and more and more and more and more. So it's a positive feedback. You get more change with each new receptor message that's happening. So you can kind of see how that's the opposite effect. So I think that is going to wrap up our initial conversation. Holy cow, disregard my little red mark there. This is going to wrap up our initial conversation about anatomy and physiology and kind of the intro to the body and some of its parts. So please take a few minutes, maybe 5 to 7 minutes, and write a summary, one sentence or so for each one of these questions. Remember to write the summary from memory as much as possible. And if you have any questions about this lecture, please add those into your notes as well, and we'll talk about them tomorrow. Thanks very much.